Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for standing by. Welcome to the BIA Knowledge Leadership Webinar Series. During the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. If you would like to ask a question during the presentation, please use the chat feature located in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. If you need to reach an operator at any time, please press the *0. As a reminder, this conference is being recorded Thursday, May 15th of 2014. I would now like to turn the conference over to Robin Thompson. Please go ahead.
Hello, everyone, and good day. On behalf of the entire team at BIA, we'd like to welcome you to May's Knowledge Leadership Webinar, where we'll be talking a little bit about ways to ensure executive sponsorship for your legal hold initiatives. Before I introduce and welcome today's speaker, I'd like to go over our housekeeping rules, again reminding you to submit your questions for Brian through the chat window. We've reserved the last 15 minutes for questions rather than the normal 10 because we expect there to be several today. And as you exit today, we're going to ask you to answer a short survey. We take your survey answers to form the curriculum for our educational series so that we can continue to ensure that we're bringing you relevant and current information about the topics that most interest you. One of the things that we've been asked to do is talk a little bit about our Knowledge Leadership Webinar Series. We debuted our series in August of 2012. It's always held the third Thursday of every month at 1 Eastern and 10 Pacific so that you can plan your schedules to join us. We've provided a link here for you. You can view our entire schedule and register for upcoming webinars, and you can also review the recordings of our past educational series. Nearly 5,000 legal professionals have attended our educational programs. What's in store the last half of the year? Well, in June, join us for medical grade e-discovery. We've invited Michael Hurwitz and Mary Novacek, two partners from the nationally recognized firm of Bowman & Brook, as they discuss the uniqueness of managing discovery in the medical device, life sciences, and pharmaceutical industries. Quickly for the rest of the year, in July it's IC 101, where BIA's Alon Israeli teaches us to speak geek. In August, we'll feature a special guest who'll tell us why law firms are now talking about governance. In September, we'll have a panel discussion featuring stakeholders from IT, RIM, and legal as we examine legal hold and preservation from their business unit perspectives. You won't want to miss our October presentation as we bring you risk and responsibilities. This is an updated presentation of our most requested All Ethics program on the ethics of legal hold. In November, Adam Feinberg and Barry Schwartz will be back with us to present the Fantastic Four, Building Effective Litigation Response Teams. And we'll end our educational year in December with Legal Hold from the CIO's View. It is my pleasure now to introduce and welcome today's speaker. Brian Schrader is a founding member of Business Intelligence Associates, where today he serves as its president. Brian is a licensed attorney and, in fact, practiced law with a Manhattan boutique firm before founding BIA. He's a technologist with over 20 years' experience in e-discovery, computer forensics, information management, computer technology, and the law. Brian is considered a pioneer in computer forensics and e-discovery and is one of the nation's most respected and sought-after authorities in these fields. Brian has been engaged as an expert witness in hundreds of matters, including the Jeffrey Skilling Enron criminal trial, the American Express and Discover lawsuits against MasterCard and Visa, and the American Home Mortgage bankruptcy. Brian, welcome to today's program, and I turn the presentation over to you.
Why, thank you, Robin, and thank you for that very generous introduction. And I'd like to welcome everyone today. Thank you for joining us on this Thursday afternoon. And hopefully you'll get as much out of this presentation as we get out of putting them together. So where I'd like to start out, and where I generally try to start out most of these discussions, is just an introduction about why are we here. Why are we talking about this? How did this become a topic of one of our webinars? And I think that that helps everyone kind of understand that where we're coming from and that we're all in the same place when we walk into the discussion. So we'll start out with what is executive sponsorship. What exactly does that mean? Executive sponsorship in a lot of different contexts can mean different things. Here what it means is getting an executive to sponsor a legal hold initiative. And it doesn't really matter what that legal hold initiative is, meaning it doesn't really matter if it's a particular software solution or whatever. The question is, how do you get executives to understand, to endorse, and to proactively support any kind of legal hold initiative that you do? And the importance behind that brings us to the next question, which is, why is executive sponsorship so important? And the answer to this is because when it comes to critical tasks inside of an organization, one of the most important things, even beyond budgets and everything else, is that users actually, that the employees, that your fellow team members inside of the organization really do understand the importance of the issue. And that's the most important reason why you want to get the executive sponsorship, is to be able to demonstrate to the organization that this is coming from the C-suite. This is coming from the highest level of the company, the president, whoever, the general counsel, whatever that particular executive role may be. And it's a way to help make sure that the entire organization really understands the importance of whatever it is you're moving forward. And in general, when we talk about getting sponsorship of the C-suite, this is a concept that doesn't necessarily just apply to legal hold. It applies to any kind of change, any kind of new process that you want to adopt inside of an organization. Today we're really going to use legal hold as an example of this, and really focus on how to get support for that legal hold process. But the fundamental principles are really kind of the same for any type of sponsorship. And in fact, if any of you on the call have done a lot of reading around change management as well, you'll see some very similar ideals here, because one of the biggest points of change management is getting executive sponsorship. So you might hear some of that. And last but not least, one of the most compelling reasons for us to put this program together was that it's one of the most frustrating concerns that we hear from people in information governance, records management, legal, all of the different industry, or all of the different roles inside of an organization that may have an interest in or ownership over the legal hold process. One of their biggest issues is, how do I get executive sponsorship? Or I'm having problems getting executive sponsorship. Can you show me how to really get the executives on board with this? And so, excuse me, because it's such a primary concern of these groups, it became a topic of this presentation. So hopefully everyone will find everything we talked today useful. So there are 5 simple or 5 essential steps to executive sponsorship. The first of that is really establishing your goal, understanding your goal. Here it's really best practices of legal hold. Before you get started on convincing anyone else or adopting a new program, you really have to understand the situation that you're trying to address. And that's the number one goal by far. We're going to talk about each one of these steps individually. Here we're just going to run down the list really quick so everybody kind of sees where we're going. Once you understand the requirements, the best practices, and what it is you're striving to reach, the next thing is to start a business case. And that business case is going to not only talk about how you do things today, it may identify the risks in what you do today. It will identify what kind of process you want to put in place, and what kind of results you expect to get, both from a risk mitigation, from a cost-saving perspective, whatever the case may be. And the business case actually becomes your summary of all of this stuff put together. It includes the steps that really kind of follow after that. The third step here we talk about today, or that we'll talk about today, is the building consensus. One of the best ways to get executive sponsorship is to show that you have the support of others in your organization, and especially in other departments. So when you go to the executive and you try to get the sponsorship and you try to get the budget for whatever you want to do, it's a lot more powerful if you can go and say, I've got hey, I'm from legal, and I've got IT, and I've got records management, and I've got the CIO, whatever the case may be. By building that team, you're going to have a lot more success. One of the most important things anytime you talk to an executive, and I live and breathe this myself anytime I talk to my board, is I got to demonstrate ROI. I've got to demonstrate that we're going to have a return on this investment, that spending the time and effort, and it's not always about money. It's even in cases where it's a relatively small amount of money, you're still going to have to convince an executive that it's worth a change in the organization. This idea, like I said, it kind of overlaps with change management a little bit, and demonstrating that there's a return on investment not only in terms of dollars but also in other things that benefit the company are very important. And the last thing on here, it's not really a step or anything, but utilizing experts is a great way to help build your case, to help understand the best practices, to help evaluate where you are today and where you want to be tomorrow. We had our last seminar, or maybe it was the one before that, I can't remember if it was a month ago or 2 months ago, we introduced the legal hold maturity model. And it was a way to help organizations really understand where they are today, where they want to go from a best practices model, and how to put that process in place to get there. And so that was, goes along with this. It can help build that business case, but having that kind of expert advice and expert opinions at any point in time, whether it's building your business case, helping convince others to build your consensus, or building your ROI, there's a ton of vendors out there, each one of them more than willing to put an expert on the phone, I would hope, and help you get to the next step and build the process. So that being said, why don't we start with the first step, which is getting to your goal of best practices. Now, I have a list here of our 5 steps for a successful legal hold, and I don't want to go into turning this into a conversation about how to build a legal hold process. This is an excerpt from our legal hold presentations. We do those occasionally, and we do a lot of them also on a private basis for law firms and corporate clients. And the point here I'm getting to is you have to understand where you want to be. And maybe if you take this particular our 5 steps to legal hold, and that becomes, what you're striving for. You're striving to be able to hit each one of these steps in the right way that gets you to the most defensible position that you can. And so the purpose behind this is really to understand what the ideal is, and then as you build your business case, you can figure out how your organization measures up and how to get from step A to step B. This will also help you become a little bit of an expert yourself in the field. It's important that when you talk to the C-suite or your managers, whoever that person is that you need to get the executive sponsorship from, that you clearly understand the problem that you're addressing. And by making sure that you've started out by figuring out what your end goals are. Now, those could change a little bit as you go through the process, but you'll be much more confident, and you'll be much more prepared to answer questions when you actually go through and do the presentation of the executives. So the last thing I would say is when you're putting the goals together, and this kind of goes into the next topic of business cases, one of the things you don't want to do is you don't want to focus solely on the problems. You want to focus on solutions and talking about changing for the better. Here's what we have, here's where we want to go, and this is why it's better. Having more positive instead of negative attitudes as well when you're putting together the business case will help a lot. It just helps people understand, and it brings everybody from a space, this sounds a little new age, but it brings everybody from the space of kind of positivity, and it really does help in the presentation overall. Anyway, so at the end of this, what you'll hopefully have is an outline of your current process versus your kind of goal of what the perfect process you'd like to be is, and an understanding of how that's going to make the process that you're talking about here, legal holds, better, more efficient, more effective, and or better able to protect the organization. So one of the best things that you can use to understand what the best practices are, aside from webinars like this and kind of written materials and publications is also case law. And so here's your standard list of cases, and we'll have these available for you to take a look at as well. It's important here to understand and communicate the risks that are involved in legal hold. One of the biggest concerns that organizations obviously have is when it comes to legal hold is protecting themselves against sanctions. And if you look at a lot of the sanctions discussions out there, it is around legal hold. Did the company proactively save their data? Did they take steps to preserve stuff? Did they follow kind of standard process and procedures? And so where a lot of that comes from, or where almost all of it comes from, is from case law, because there's really no federal guidelines or federal rules on the topic, or state rules really. That may change in the future, but right now there aren't. So understanding that case law is not only helps you look at some of the examples, or look at some of the court recommendations as to what should take place, but a lot of it also gives you a great story that you can understand what happened. So, I mean, my favorite one really is the Apple versus Samsung cases, because there's two very well-written decisions, and there's some discussion back and forth about what the standard should be. It talks about what's expected from a legal hold, when you should issue it, all these kind of things, how often it should be reminded, how data should be suspended, all these topics about how to effectively and defensively put a legal hold process in place. And that's the source for a lot of these articles that you might read out there. So while we don't want to, we're not advising scare tactics. I want to be absolutely certain. I mean, I see a little bit too much of that occasionally, where people say, well, if you don't do this, you're going to have huge penalties, and it's not the case. There's a lot of studies out there that show that a relatively small percentage of sanction cases actually end up in huge costs, although it's, there's a cost just to defending these cases and just to defending the process. So even if you end up not facing sanctions, if you don't have a process in place that you have to defend, it's going to cost tens of thousands of dollars, if not more, to defend that, to address that, versus just having a process that is clearly defensible from the outset. So, this is really part of talking about the risk and reward. What is the ROI? A little bit comes in here as well. Well, the ROI, you can think of this. Some people kind of refer to an insurance policy. You can think of it as, here's this investment we're going to make in this process, and it's going to help us avoid any kind of sanctions or other issues in the future that we could either spend a lot of money defending, or even potentially face sanctions if we don't have a good process in place. So, again, I don't want to be pitching any kind of scare tactics, but it's important that these are there, and a lot of it comes from a lot of it will help you in that kind of risk reward and risk mitigation argument as well. So the next step is building your business case. So what does that exactly mean? Well, hopefully by the time you get to this step, you've gone through and you've understood a little bit about legal hold, and you have the standard in place that you really want to strive to. Again, we have this the legal hold maturity model, which gives you some really good pointers on how to do that, available on the website. Then at that point, you want to start building your case study, right? An internal case study that applies to you. And so the best way to do that is to take your standard, take that and compare it to what you do today, and then analyze the differences. Compare your current process with your industry and other standards, legal standards, practice standards, court standards, whatever the case may be, and really be able to show, look, this is where we are, this is where we should be, and here's the differences, right? And that'll help people understand, really shows a clear path. This is the end goal. Here's where we are, and this is ideally where we want to be. Part of that is also, if you have a chance, and I highly, highly recommend it, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in a second, do a proof of concept as part of your business study. There's nothing better than that, and like I said, we'll talk a little bit more about it. One of the biggest parts of your business case, like I said before, is not just talking about dollars and cents. Risk mitigation is huge. I mean, a lot of what the legal department does, and what a lot of this has been legal hold and very specifically has been compelled by, is this idea of mitigating risk. Being able to say, look, we took certain steps. We're not at risk of sanctions. We're not at risk of even having to defend this. And again, I don't want to harp on this a whole lot, but I do want to stress that it's not just about avoiding sanctions. It's about avoiding the confrontation, because the confrontation alone is extremely expensive. And coming from a reformed lawyer myself, lawyers charge a lot of money, and so going in and having even the argument on this, if you can avoid that, that's a huge risk mitigation in and of itself, let alone staying away from sanctions. So then, and look at other benefits. The other benefits really depend on your organization. You might have other risks. You may have some automation stuff. For example, if you have a legal hold process that can automatically synchronize with your Exchange server, so that when somebody gets put on legal hold, it flicks the switch in Exchange and puts them on legal hold automatically and takes them off when they're done automatically, so that you have other benefits like that as well. And you can show, well, look, this isn't only benefiting our risk management, but it's reducing IT's burden, and it's doing all of this stuff. So depending on your individual organization, and this is something that really your experts, you could rely on experts as well to help you figure out, what are some of the other places where this particular change could have a good impact to the organization, and you want to make all of that part of your business case. And then finally, and we'll talk a lot about this because it's a separate point, is your business case should talk about a return on investment. It's going to cost us X amount of dollars, and we're going to either save X amount or we're going to reduce our risk by X amount. And we'll, like I said, go into detail on return on investment in a minute. So before we do that, I mentioned part of your business case really should be the proof of concept. And one of the questions is, well, why do a proof of concept? Just so we're all clear, when I say proof of concept, I'm not talking about like a mock-up. I'm talking about actually getting your hands into a process, getting the system you're talking about. Like here we're talking about litigation hold, getting that litigation hold solution or the process, if you're building your own process, installed and try it out. If you don't have if whoever you're dealing with, whoever you're looking at isn't willing to do a proof of concept, run away fast because it's a really bad sign. The proof of concept takes you beyond the dog and pony show and into that real-world testing. It gets your team the ability to really share and see how that software is going to work in your day-to-day life. We do this all the time for our customers, or I should say potential customers. And the vast majority of them find it to be one of the most useful things they do because it gets them an experience in their environment, working with their team, with their resources, and really gives them the ability to generate hands-on questions that they're not going to have through just a dog and pony show. I'm sure you've all been in this situation before, in any kind of purchase you do, that after you get done with a purchase, if you haven't had a chance to really kind of do that test drive, to do a real first-hand experience, you're going to end up with a lot more questions once you do start doing that. One of the other great things about a proof of concept, and this is really, in my view, a critical thing, is it allows you to evaluate not only the product but also the support team. One of the things that you'll find, or you might have seen, and I see all the time, is that whenever a software company goes out, or even a services company goes out and talks to clients, hey, what do you think about our software? What do you think about our solutions? What do you think about this or that? The most important thing that everybody comes back with is that the customer service and customer support across the board is like the number one concern. And I remember a survey I saw a couple of years ago that actually said basically the result of it was that people would rather buy less equipped or less capable software that had better support and service than vice versa, than buying the greatest software in the world with bad service. And so, but that's the thing you don't get to test if you don't do a proof of concept. And yet it's one of the things that's the most critical to the organization and the most critical to your ongoing use of it. And so while it's something that everybody rates as like their number one concern across the board, even beyond software, it's kind of anything, it's something that they rarely get a chance to do unless they do a proof of concept. So it's something that's great, and it gives you the chance to evaluate that and make it part of your overall pitch. That not only are you pitching a great product, but also you've tested out and you're happy with the support and everything else. Again, it provides a kind of an unparalleled insight into the product, but also into your organization. It's going to show you how this software, how this solution is actually going to work on a day-to-day basis. Again, the dog and pony shows, and I do them all the time. Anybody who is in a product business does. they're great. And ours we do at a production environment. I've seen some people do demos on kind of a special demo environment. Either way, you don't really know until you get it inside of your own organization. So it's going to give you that insight, and it's going to really make you be able to evaluate that solution before you kind of go all in. And the last point on the list here: would you purchase a car without a test drive? Well, maybe if you're a car collector and you're talking about a 1968, Shelby Mustang or something, but you wouldn't buy a brand new car generally without a test drive. That being said, let's move on to number 3. So number 3 is building a consensus. And why is this important? Well, we talked a little bit about it at the opening. Building a consensus, it's not a requirement. Let's put it there. Put that out there right away. But it will make it so much easier when you go into the C-suite or you go into the manager that you need to get approval of or get executive sponsorship from, to be able to go in and say, look, I've got everybody else, And not only that, you can show that you're aligning with the organization as strategic goals and initiatives, aligning with your own department priorities, personal priorities, but as well as other department priorities. You can show how a solution is going to impact not only your team, it's not only going to save money, but it's also going to do, make it easier for IT, or make it easier for records management, or make it easier for information governance. Whatever the case is, bring those people on board. And if it's a great solution, they're going to be jumping at the bit. I know that in most cases, whenever we're dealing with enterprises, corporations, whether we're talking about legal hold or whether we're talking about our data collection software or whatever, when legal brings in IT is almost always on board because anything, I don't want this to come out wrong, but anything that IT can do to reduce the burden that they have from legal requests, you're going to see that they're going to very quickly, as long as it meets their criteria for defensibility and data protection and things like that, they're going to jump on board because IT's job description is running the computer foundation for the company. It's not answering litigation requests. This gets them the ability to focus on what they're supposed to be doing, focusing on what brings money in and really benefits the organization, and not being focused on litigation costs and litigation tasks. So it's a great place. And I know a lot of people will say, well, we have difficulties. There's a classic picture of legal and IT inside of organizations not getting together. Hopefully you don't have that situation, but if you do, you can bring in an expert. I know that's one of the things we do a lot, is kind of bridge the gap between legal and IT, and help make sure that each one of them can, sometimes we act as translator, translating, Latin phrases into geek speak and geek speak into Latin phrases. And other times, it's just a matter of making sure that everybody's on the same page. When you build that consensus, you're going to understand and incorporate other people's goals and initiatives. And then by doing so, you're really going to build that internal coalition amongst your peers. You can cultivate individual champions, other people who are who can get excited about the process, who can really drive it right along with you. And again, all of this is just, call it corporate peer pressure. At the end of the day, you're able to craft a compelling story beyond just one person or one department. And the more you can show that this is a positive impact across the organization, across individuals, across departments, across functions, the better off you're going to be in showing why this is so important to be adopted. The next point is demonstrating our ROI. This is the favorite of all managers, and well, I shouldn't say favorite. It's something they have to deal with every day in every aspect of their life. Excuse me. If they want to, start a new product line, if they want to hire more employees, whatever, there's always going to be an ROI. It's always a question on every single thing, or it should be. And so the purpose of an ROI is to be able to come back and say, here's what I'm asking, here's the change, here's what it's going to cost, and here's what it's going to, here's the return we're going to get on that. So hopefully, and we'll go through kind of a very simplified example of this in a minute, but the idea is that hopefully you can demonstrate the value of the solution, right? You can say, look, if we spend $10,000, we're going to save $100,000. If we spend, if we spend $20,000, we're going to save $20,000. So it's a wash. But there's all these other benefits that we can look at, and it really allows the executive you're talking to understand in real terms, to hit their bottom line that they're responsible for every day. And that's one of the things that executives are the most responsible for is individual performance and profit and loss on each one of their organizations or each one of their product lines. And so when you come to them and want to spend more money or spend more time or expend corporate resources, they really want to be able to see, okay, that's great. What's it going to cost and what's it going to bring us? What's the benefit? Speaking of benefits, it's important that we don't limit those benefits just to hard costs. There are soft costs. What are soft costs? Well, soft costs generally speaking, it's always the cost of the manual part of a process, right? So, if you have somebody who works 50 hours a week on something, and by adopting some new process or some new software or whatever, you can cut that to 25 hours a week, and now they have 25 hours they can be utilized somewhere else in the organization or on other projects. Basically, you're saving 25 hours a week times whatever their hourly rate is, and multiply that out by the year, and you end up with what your savings are. Soft costs can also be, it takes us 3 steps, or it takes us, 2 steps instead of 10 steps, and so with each employee, instead of taking half an hour to respond to a document request, to a legal hold initiative or custodian questionnaire, it now takes them 5 minutes. You can do some math around that and figure out, okay, well, I have 100 employees. We had 10 hours apiece. The old process was 30 minutes apiece. The new process is 10 minutes apiece. We're saving 20 minutes per employee, 100 employees, 2,000 hours or 2,000 minutes, and now we're getting into numbers that I can't do in my head. But you see where you can do that kind of soft costs as well, and it really depends on your organization. And it's something that you can get an expert to come in and help you with as well. They'll be able to help you walk through and really dig in and identify the impacts and the kind of savings that you're going to have. The other big thing is the risk mitigation. There's not a solid value to it, right? You can't say, well, if we implement this thing today, we're going to avoid $100,000 in sanctions tomorrow. Because you never know. You may never get sanctioned. But eliminating the risk is what you're talking about. It's not necessarily going in and saying, well, if we do this, we're not going to get sanctioned. Yeah, that's what it is, but you're not able to put a dollar value on it is what I'm saying. And so, but it's an incredibly important part of the overall process. And in fact, if you look at most of the sanctions that are out there in the world, most of the cost, most of the risk that comes from preserving documents is because people don't do the legal hold process in a defensible manner. You can make the argument that by using an automated process that's designed for legal hold, regardless of who it is, that becomes a much more defensible process and much more defensible position to be speaking from. There's, like I said earlier, about efficiencies of employees, and there could be a lot of other benefits. It really depends on your organization, and it really depends on what you do today. But as you go through it, you'll be able to look and see what other benefits there may be. And again, as we the next we'll talk about how to identify some of those in a sec as well. So let's do a little quick, simple ROI calculation. This is an extraordinarily simplistic look. It just is in an organization that that has a number of legal holds. They have a single legal hold administrator whose full-time cost, who's spending her full-time every day or his full-time every day just managing legal holds. And this is more common than you may think. In some organizations, it's multiple people doing this. And so in the kind of scenario we put together here to show you how an ROI would work, you start out with a legal hold administrator making a pretty average $40 an hour for that kind of a position inside of an organization. You assume that she's spending all 40 hours a week, or he's spending all 40 hours a week, and you have an annual cost. Now, the annual cost here is very, very rough. I haven't really gone to the steps of including benefits and all sorts of other things, but you can do that inside your organization. And then, we have a supervisor who spends a couple hours a week supervising the process and what their hourly rate is. So in this case, you have $96,720 a year is what is being spent in real money costs, leaving aside any of the other efficiencies and things like that we were talking about. Now, in this particular scenario, we're assuming we've done a proof of concept, or we've at least done an analysis where we can come back and say, look, by doing this new process, by doing things like automating reminders and making reporting automatic and being able to tie into some enterprise systems that allow you to automatically shut stuff down so that you don't have IT involved or whatever, we assume that the legal hold administrator, instead of him spending 40 hours a week, he's going to spend 20 hours a week on this. It cuts the need in half for both the administrator and his or her supervisor. And again, through a proof of concept, you'll be able to figure out what that is. You'll be able to look and see what you were spending before and how this new process is reducing the time required. So those key assumptions, also assuming I've put in the cost of our legal hold solution here, $59.40 a year. But you could put in anything you have, and it can range from up to six figures or more if you want, depending on what kind of system you use. But you put in the cost of the solution, and then you do a very simple analysis. What is your project savings? Well, we're projecting a 50% savings, so we're going to save $48,000. What's the solution cost? Well, $6,000 a year. And so what's the realized ROI? Well, it's 814%. So in other words, we're going to spend $6,000, and we're going to save 800%, or 8 times that amount. And so it shows that there's real money coming back into the organization. Now, you can also have all sorts of soft ROIs as well, less employee disruption, risk mitigation, all sorts of other things that will help sell this as well, and that should be part of your ROI. It's hard savings versus soft savings, and it's very important because those soft savings are what kill a lot of organizations because they're just time sinks and they're resource sinks. And so although it's sometimes very difficult to quantify those, it's probably from at least maybe your chief risk officer's perspective, the more important part of the analysis. So, and that's basically how to do it. Now, when you go to do your sample ROI, you may have a current solution that you want to replace. So you put in, the cost of the current solution in your current costs. You may have, more people. You may have, developed some internal system for tracking that requires IT processes. Whatever the case may be. Again, this is a very simplistic look at it based on just looking at the people involved and the hours involved. But it could go beyond this. And as I say at the bottom, hint, ask your vendor to help because most likely, or an expert, whatever you prefer relying on. But they're going to have a lot of information that can help you put this together. And speaking of, one last thing before I jump off of this. Although I'm talking about bringing all sorts of other stuff into the ROI calculation. Just a piece of advice from somebody who's done a lot of this kind of stuff over the years. You're much better keeping it simple. So as much as I'm saying bring in all sorts of other costs, if those costs get really convoluted or really stretched and you don't need them to make your point, you're always better off keeping a presentation and keeping calculations much more simple. And you can note that there may be additional cost savings as well. So that brings us to our last bullet point, which is utilize experts. And really, the ROI is a great place to do that because chances are they've helped a lot of organizations put together ROIs. And so they can come in and they can help you identify places where you'll have savings that you may not have recognized before you had that kind of independent analysis. There's also fresh ideas. You may have been working inside an organization for a long time, and it's always a good thing to bring in some fresh blood, some fresh ideas, people who can look at the big picture that from an outside perspective that may help you bring in some better information. Expert advice. Getting experts who can help you put together not only that initial goal of where you want to be, but kind of support and why you want to be there. They're going to have all sorts of information there. And finally, experts, and this is really important, not only insight into the industry, but insight into what others are doing. you can bring in an advisor, you can bring in an expert, you can bring in a vendor, whoever you like, whoever you best trust. But you want to make sure that they've had experience for a number of years and in a number of other organizations if you're going to rely on them for expert advice. And the reason behind this, I mean, I serve as an expert, so this is kind of an issue a little near and dear to my heart, and it's like I'm recommending a stock purchase and telling you I own the stock or something, but it's kind of someone with a little bit of a vested interest in this topic. It really does help. And in fact, most organizations will give you support around evaluating their product, give you all the free advice you'd like, help you put together these proposals, help you put together your ROI, help you put together where your goal is and what your business case should look like. And so by relying on the experts, you can look at it two ways. It's going to get you a lot of education. It's going to make the presentation better. And hopefully it's going to offload some work so you can focus on other things as well. So anyway, those are the main things. This is how we would recommend going about convincing and ensuring that you get your executives on board. Hopefully, now that we've all sat through this, you'll be able to answer questions when you're talking to the executives to get their sponsorship. You'll be able to talk about best practices. You'll be able to show a solid business case. You'll be able to provide a clear and meaningful ROI. And you'll also, especially if you do a proof of concept, you'll have the experience of that and the specifics where you can say, look, this isn't just a proposal. We know this is going to work, and here's why. I think the proof of concept is something that a lot of people don't think about doing. But in something that's as serious as legal hold, I would highly recommend it, because the last thing you want to do is get into a situation, especially an installed solution or a long-term contract, on something that you haven't had a chance to really take for a test drive. You wouldn't do it for a car. Don't do it for this. Whether it's legal hold or a new email system, whatever the case may be, we can't stress that enough. So that being said, a minute or two over, but we talked about keeping about 15 minutes here because we expected a lot of questions. So at that, I will turn it over to Robin. Do we have any questions?
Absolutely, we do. Let's see. First one, Brian, it says, this all sounds great, but what if I do all this and I just can't get the C-suite's attention? Do you have any recommendations about how to get a foot in the door in that situation?
Sure. And I understand that. I mean, you can go through and create a really great plan and a really clear plan, but you just have a problem getting in the door or getting whoever the executive sponsor should be to really pay attention to the issue. And, it happens a lot, and it's because executives are in the business of building their product or supporting their customers, and anything that distracts from that, especially legal issues, is something they don't want to talk about. They don't see it as furthering the business aims. And so and I fully understand that, and I absolutely get it, and it can be hard to get people's attention. There's basically two ways of doing it, I would say. Well, three ways. First off, if you can go to them and say, hey, Mr. Executive, how do you like to save $100,000 a year? That might get their attention right there. Focus on the money savings that you can do because, like I said, the ROI, that's what everybody's going to want to know first off. So if you can do that, that's a great way. Second, as much as I hate to say scare tactics, you can use articles and other things, and I would recommend like article blurbs, and you just send those to your executive sponsor every once in a while saying, here's another company, I think we really need to take care of this. Putting that kind of risk mitigation, number one. If the dollars and cents don't work, the risk mitigation might. And the third thing is actually something that we had experienced recently. And we had a client who was having difficulty getting attention of the GC, who's busy on a bunch of other stuff, and I completely understand that. She actually happened to be in a presentation, some sort of not a webinar, but an actual live presentation, I can't remember what it was, where she had spoken to and seen a GC of another company that she happened to know was really good friends with the GC in her company. And she, in talking about that, found that this friend outside of her company had recently adopted a legal hold process, and she used that through LinkedIn and said, look, I attended your thing, we met, I understand that you're good friends with my general counsel, so-and-so, and I'm having a little bit of difficulty getting him to adopt this. Would you mind? I know I know your friends, and that you have a relationship there because I've seen you mentioned before. Would you mind giving my GC a call and letting him know what you did and why? And then literally, like 2 weeks after that, the process started moving forward, and they eventually got a legal hold put in place. But that was using those personal relationships, right? It's not always an opportunity, but to the extent you can do something like that, bring somebody who, especially from outside the organization, and even sometimes an expert's good enough to really talk to the executive and figure out the best way to approach it. But it's a really common problem, and I know I just spent 5 minutes on that answer, but I think it covers a lot.
Right. Brian, we actually have a couple of questions around the proof of concept. One person asked if that would be a recommended way to get executive sponsorship, and the other one was, should I do one proof of concept or multiple? Doesn't that take a huge amount of time to actually install and test out multiple solutions? So if you can do those two in the same answer?
Sure. So I think one of the things that I can't stress how important I think a proof of concept is, and sometimes doing a proof of concept in certain cases are harder than others. If you're talking about a web-based solution, if you were going to go to adoptsalesforce.com for your sales team, for example, right? It'd be relatively easy to test it because there's no software to install, nothing like that. If you're looking at Legal Hold, that's the way our Legal Hold is. You don't have to install anything, so it's really easy. So if you're looking at those kind of solutions, you can test multiple ones, and I'd encourage you to. It allows you to really be able to compare it within your environment and your needs, not just on a chart somewhere. So when it comes to how many, I guess the bigger question is how important. It's like the most important thing in my book because I think it helps you make the best decision, helps you evaluate it, and really helps you make that case to your the executive sponsor. With respect to how many, completely understand. Generally, what I would recommend is anywhere from 1 to 3. Depending on whether you're talking about some big installation or whether it's easy to implement. You do an evaluation, you look at the ones, you'll be able to tell which ones you're the most interested in. And again, this is a great place to get an expert in to give you some advice as well. And that's what I would recommend as far as that goes.
Okay. How do I get other departments engaged?
Well,
you already answered that one?
No. Well, I'm not sure. I can answer it anyway. How do you get other departments engaged? Well, you look to see how it's going to impact them. One of the things that, for example, in our data collection side, it's very easy for the legal team, especially once they've done a proof of concept with IT, to get IT behind it because it's something IT hates to do in the first place. So it kind of depends on what you're talking about. If you're getting IT involved with Legal Hold, you can show them the benefits. Say, look, if we adopt this system, you're not going to have to worry about turning on and off Legal Holds on an exchange anymore because it's going to be automatic. Or, we're not going to be making requests to you every day to go collect data from an employee or 100 because we can now do it directly and with a couple of clicks of a button. So, information governance, records management. These are organizations that are really starting to get into e-discovery with, jump in with both feet. And in some organizations, the records managers become decision makers with respect to Legal Hold because it really impacts. If you think about Legal Hold, it's just another retention policy, and so. The way to do that, is to really go to them and say, look, here's some benefits that I think. I'm looking at this solution. I think it would benefit you as well. So why don't you come into the conversation and be involved in this process as well?
Very interesting. Just have a couple more, Brian. I don't have full-time resources dedicated to Legal Holds. We have a process. But we don't have quite enough need for a full-time dedicated person, given that Is it hard to show real ROI, to show real savings that exceeds the cost of the solution?
It still is. And again, one of the things I talked about in the ROI is it's not just about the dollars. It is about risk mitigation. It's about efficiency of other employees. So even if you only have a couple of legal holds a year, and actually, if you only have a couple of legal holds a year, there's a possibility that it's riskier for you not to have an automated solution. If you have somebody who's doing this every single day, and you're doing, most organizations, I think every poll I've seen from a bunch of different organizations, say more than 50% of companies and other organizations out there are still using spreadsheets and emails as a way to track their legal hold. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that, as long as you're following all the steps and doing it right. If you're doing it every day, then it's a routine, and you're doing it and you're taking care of it. If you're not doing it every day, and it's something that is once a week or once every couple of months or whatever the case may be, if you've got a light load, well, the problem there is that, you may not be spending a lot of cash on the issue, but you have a higher risk because there's not a dedicated resource. There's not somebody who is just living and breathing it every day. So it increases the potential that somebody's going to forget to send out a reminder, or somebody's going to forget to, or they're not going to get to the legal hold as quickly. I mean, there's a bunch of ways around that. But it's that risk management. And also look at the impact of the employees. Like I mentioned, a good legal hold process should make the burden to the employees very low. And so you can look at that as being a soft cost. And there's other stuff like that as well. So again, don't focus just on what is the individual cost. I mean, we did that on the simplistic ROI that I showed. But within your organization, there's going to be a lot of other costs and benefits to having an automated solution.
Okay. What percentage of legal hold artifacts tend to be emails versus other documents on shared drives, SharePoint, laptops, etc.?
That's a great question. It depends on the organization, is what I would say. We have some organizations, in my experience, over the last 10 years, it's all over the place. In general, with most people, the vast majority of the data, and really where the smoking guns and really interesting stuff usually is in the email. And 9 times out of 10, probably, or maybe 8 or 9 or 7 or 8 times out of 10, individual custodians are going to have more email than anything else, and it's going to dwarf the size of anything else they have. Especially if you have a process where you can eliminate files from like a local drives that also exist in email attachments as kind of being duplicative. Once you take that into account, it really becomes an email game. However, that being said, organizations that have really strict policies, we have some organizations that limit the user's mailbox to 50 megabytes. That significantly changes the equation. Now, actually, the company I'm thinking of that had that has since changed that policy because, we have a lot more data today than we ever did before. But in those situations, you're going to end up with kind of the opposite, where you have a little bit of email and a lot of everything else. It depends on the organization, but generally speaking, email dwarfs overall.
Mm-hmm. Brian, we've got time for one more question. It says, Brian, your ROI example shows a clear and probably convincing savings, but what if my ROI shows a cost to the organization? Then what?
That's a really good question. Let's say you're not spending a whole lot of money today, so any kind of cost is going to be higher, or you've chosen some larger kind of really expensive installation, and so it dwarfs the cost savings. Again, it's not just about the dollars and cents on hard savings like that. A lot of it comes into efficiencies. I feel like I'm going to kind of repeat things that I've said in response to a similar question, but that's what it comes down to. It's if you can't show a hard cost savings where you could say, like in our example, here's $48,000. If we spend $6,000, we get $48,000 back. It'd be very difficult for an executive to say, no, I don't want the money. if you're walking into a situation where you're going to say, look, we're going to spend, I need $10,000 above any kind of immediate savings, you can show risk mitigation. Again, some people kind of think about solutions like this that help insure and avoid risk as more of kind of an insurance policy against those things. I don't necessarily like to use that, but it's a good analogy. And that's really kind of where it comes down to in looking at it is what are the other kind of soft benefits, process benefits, reduction of impact to the employees' daily lives, things like that. That's where the savings are going to come in, and that's what you should then really kind of focus on.
Perfect timing, Brian. We're 2 minutes to the top of the hour. First of all, Brian, thank you for your time today, and we'd like to thank everyone on the call on behalf of the entire team here at BIA for your valuable time in attending our program today, and we look forward to seeing you at our future Knowledge Leadership webinar events that are the third Thursday of every month at 1 Eastern. Thank you so much for your time, and please remember to fill out the survey as you exit today so that we can plan our program for 2015. Thank you, Brian, and thank you, everyone.